Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. And if you're watching this on the day the video was dropped, happy Halloween. And it is in the spirit of Halloween that today I'll be reviewing a horror figure. It is of course the Dracula Prince of Darkness 1/6 scale figure from Trick or Treat Studios. Now, for me, like a lot of other cinema goers out there really are only two contenders for the definitive Dracula, and that is Bela Lugosi's Dracula from the Universal horror films and Christopher Lee's Dracula from the Hammer films. Now, of course, Christopher Lee has the advantage because he portrayed Dracula in the Hammer films 7 times, and I believe he played the character a couple more times in other films as well. And of course, famously, Christopher Lee was never entirely happy with his portrayal in those movies, but my gosh, it is iconic. And so, when Trick or Treat Studios announced that they were going to be releasing a 1/6 scale version of this character, I was absolutely thrilled. So, let's get this party started and take a look at the packaging. Now, I have to say, I really do like this packaging an awful lot. I love the design of it. They've taken the classic image from the original film poster where we can see Christopher Lee's face there. The blood trickling down looks absolutely fantastic, or fang-tastic if you'll pardon the pun, and I just think this looks absolutely brilliant. Of course, it's got the Dracula logo at the top of the packaging there, and of course the whole thing is produced in a red sepia tone as well, obviously simulating blood, which I think is really cool and very much in keeping with the spirit of the film. I think this looks really presentable. I think it's great to take inspiration from that movie poster, so I think this looks great in terms of display already. Then if we flip it over and look at the side panel, slightly less impressive here, but we do have the blood trickling down, which is a nice touch, and of course we do have the name of the figure in that logo font, which looks great, so you can put this on display. Personally, I would always love to have an image here, so a nice still of Christopher Lee would have been really cool, or even a photo of the figure itself, but hey, you can't have everything. Now, when we flip the packaging over, we do have this wonderful still of Christopher Lee here, again with the blood dripping down there and in a red filter. I think this looks absolutely brilliant. Again, very, very displayable. Not much in the way of text, which is great, so you can really maximize this image, and I think this is just a very nice display piece in its own right. Now, the front of the box has a folding flap cover as well, so when we fold this open, we can see another striking image on the left of Christopher Lee, this time bearing his fangs. Again, nice full page image, for lack of a better description, and the blood coming down there, and we actually have a little bit of text this time saying the world's most evil vampire lives again, seeks human victims to satisfy his thirst for blood. It looks absolutely brilliant. Again, very, very striking. What a great image to use here. I think this looks brilliant. And then on the right hand side, of course, we have the window display so we can see the figure in all of his glory. Inside the packaging behind the figure, there is this rather flimsy cardboard inlay, but it is quite nicely designed. We can actually see an image there of some candles burning. Again, I think they're taken directly from the film. And then we have this interesting outline of a coffin, which is slightly unusual. I'm not entirely sure this is massively successful and kind of works in the context that it's been placed in, but it is a nice effort nonetheless. So let's take a look at the figure outside of the packaging. And interestingly, they've opted to give him the head with the snarling fang teeth. And I think that's a good choice because, to be honest, this is the one I'm going to want to display most of the time. And if we take a closer look at this head sculpt, I think it's fair to say they've done a pretty good job with the likeness of Christopher Lee here. Now, it's not spot on, and of course it depends on what movie and what still and what moment you want to compare against, and maybe I haven't picked the best moment here to compare against on screen, but I think this likeness is pretty strong. Now, it's not perfect, but I think it's pretty darn good. Of course, we have the open snarling mouth there, which looks great, a little wider than what we see on screen, but nevertheless very detailed. Great that we can actually see the tongue there, and you can see a lot of different colours and washes running over that, which looks fantastic. You can see each line on each individual tooth, which looks real and authentic, which is brilliant, and they have managed to get some of the bloodshot effect into the eyes. Now, I don't think this is as entirely successful as it could have been. If we compare with the image on the left here, you can see obviously that Lee's eyes are much more bloodshot, whereas they're a bit more subtle on the actual figure itself, but nevertheless, that detail is there, that bulging mania is there, and I think they've done a really nice job with the skin tone and some of the shading around the eyes, and even on the hair as well. There's a hint of white there, a little bit of grey coming through at the temples, which is a nice touch, and I think, overall, they've done a pretty nice job with this sculpt. I'm actually very, very pleased with it. So let's take a look at the tailoring and the costuming of this figure, and we've got to start with the cape, which is probably the most luxurious cape I've got in my 1/6 collection. I'm really pleased with the amount of material they've used on this figure. As you can see, it can wrap right the way around and with ample room, and of course you can fold it back, and inside the cape we have this red lining as well. Now this seems to be a bit more of a felt rather than a satin material, but it's actually very pleasing to the touch and it works really well. It's nice and thick and heavy and very dramatic, and I feel like you're getting a real sense of quality out of this, which is really nice. Now it may not be authentic to what we see on screen, but the overall effect is really impressive. Underneath his cloak, of course, he does have a suit. There's nothing too remarkable about the suit, nothing you wouldn't have seen on any other figure. The material on the suit itself is a little bit thin for my liking. At points you can see a little bit through it and see his white shirt underneath. So the material isn't the best quality. The other thing you'll notice is that his actual buttons there have actually been sewn together, so the two layers of the suit are actually sewn in there, so you can't just pop these off. But underneath, you'll notice he does have a cravat, which we'll see a little bit closer in a moment, and he has this frilly lace shirt as well, which is really cool. Now it's actually mostly hidden and it's really difficult to get to it and appreciate this detail, but it's lovely that it is there. You can see a little bit more detail on the cravat here, and you'll see obviously it's attached by an elastic band, and it just goes round his shirt collar. Now his shirt collar, although his shirt is actually sewn in, the collar actually isn't, which makes this a little bit sloppy as a fit, and this could have been tightened up a little bit because they just tend to overhang, so you might want to manipulate this. Now it's not a huge issue by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought I would mention it because it seems slightly sloppy in comparison to the rest of the figure. Now, I always like to see functional pockets on my 1/6 action figures, and Dracula has not let me down here because, as you'll see, he has pockets on his blazer, but also on his trousers as well. And of course, you can pop different items into these if you want to, but I just like the detail. Very often these are sewn up or they're not real, and I love that they've gone to this extra effort of actually making these proper pockets. I also wanted to point out the hands on this figure. So the two hands that he comes with in the packaging are these sort of gripping or reaching hands, these grasping hands, and I think they look absolutely fantastic. What you will notice, of course, is with the left hand he has his ring, which is very nicely detailed, nicely painted, but both hands are actually very nicely painted in terms of the skin tone that they've got there. Again, a number of different washes running through them to make them look a little bit more authentic to what we see on screen, which is really nice, and I just love how these have been moulded. Now, my one criticism of the hands as a whole is that sometimes you will see a seam on one of the fingers or running down the palm, which is not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but for the most part they look really striking. And then finally I wanted to touch on where the trouser meets the shoe. Now the shoe is a hard plastic, but what you do see here is that sadly if you lift that leg up there is no socks, and you know this shouldn't bother me, but it does. I just wish they'd included the socks here. I think that would have been really cool. Who knows, maybe Dracula didn't wear socks but nevertheless I feel like it's a detail that they've overlooked, and I appreciate it. It's not on view, but nevertheless I was a little bit disappointed. Moving on to the articulation, he does have a ball joint at the top of the neck there, so that will allow him to rotate his head all the way around. Now interestingly, mine only really wanted to travel in one direction. It didn't want to go that other way there. There was a little bit of resistance and I don't know whether that's just mine, but I went with the path of least resistance. But anyway, he can rotate his head all the way around and he can lean it left and right a little bit as well. Not a huge range of motion, but enough. Now he can also nod his head backwards quite a good distance. It doesn't go forward really at all, which is interesting, but it does go back really healthy amounts. He has ball joints in the shoulders, of course, so the arms will lift up and out, but there's also a butterfly wing joint here, I'm pretty sure, so that allows that arm to really reach all the way forwards and backwards as well. So a good reach here, which is fantastic. Now, of course, the arms will lift up and out. There is a complementary bicep swivel up there, and we have a double joint at the elbow, so that hand can reach all the way back to his head there, which is brilliant. Now, he's got a ball joint at the wrist, of course, and you can see that. So that hand will rotate all the way around, and it will also hinge forwards and backwards as well. Now, the ball joint itself is a little bit unsightly. It's fine when the sleeve's down, but it doesn't always look fantastic. Torso articulation is interesting. I feel as if there's 2 points, one in the upper torso and one in the waist. He can definitely move from side to side and swivel around, and he can kind of lean left and right a little bit as well, but it's a little bit stiff and not very flexible. And much like the head, he can't really bend forwards, but he can go back a really good amount, a surprising amount actually. He can arch his back all the way back there, but when it comes to going forward, not so much. More ball joints in the hips, the legs will kick out to the side. There's also also a complementary thigh swivel at the top there, so that upper leg will rotate all the way around, which is great. The legs will kick forwards and they will go backwards as well. Now there's a double joint at the knee, as you would hope, so that lower leg will kick all the way back there, which is fantastic. And then finally at the ankle, you'll notice he does have that swivel at the top of the shoe as we saw earlier, so it will rotate all the way around. And there seems to be a little bit of a hinge at the ankle to allow the foot to lift up and down ever so slightly. In terms of accessories, he comes with an additional 3 hands, 2 of which are left hands. So we have 2 open palm hands and we have a slightly more gripping hand, which is quite interesting, although no accessories to grip, but he does come with this very cool alternate head, so a neutral head, which is great. It's great to have the 2 looks for this character. So this is a nice start, but there's really not a lot else, and I feel like there's a few other things that would have been nice, including a display stand, because oddly, one isn't included. Now, I can live without a display stand, I've got lots of them, and to be fair, this figure stands very well on his own. He doesn't necessarily need one, in all fairness. So I'm willing to overlook that, but I think there's some other little bits and pieces, I don't know, a candle, a glass of wine or whatever. There's so many things that we associate with this character that I think they could have given him something else that would have been quite interesting, and the fact that he comes with a gripping hand suggests that perhaps they were thinking about it or leaving it to the customer to devise their own props. So let's take a look at this alternative head sculpt. Again, for me, I think this is actually very strong. It's a very good likeness of Christopher Lee. I think you can immediately tell who it's meant to be. I think the paint apps are really nicely done. The proportions all look to be pretty accurate for the most part. I would be critical though and say it's probably not an exact likeness. If anything, he's not quite as aquiline in his features as obviously the actor. If we compare these 2 images here, obviously you can see there that Christopher Lee is a lot more slimline in the face in this film, whereas the head sculpt here is probably a little bit broader than it should be, so it's not spot on accurate, but I think it's very, very close, and I think it's still a very good likeness all in all. And I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to show you today about this figure. Now, this is essentially treated as a budget release. You will notice that this figure comes in at a much lower price point than other figures in the 1/6 scale market these days. So that is definitely appreciated, but I think it's also reflected in some of the things that we're seeing with this figure. Most notably, of course, in the lack of accessories. No display stand, there's really nothing else going on apart from a couple of extra hands, although we do get a very cool alternate sculpt as well, which is brilliant. There's also a little bit of corner cutting here and there, so the fact that it doesn't come with socks, for example, the sort of light, very thin material they've used for the blazer, for example, in the actual suit itself. There's little things like that here and there where you can see where they've cut a couple of corners and saved a few pennies all in all. However, I have to say, I'm still largely very, very impressed with this figure, and I feel like it is still a very high quality figure despite all of that, because the articulation works fine, the joints are nice and stiff and smooth, he has no issue standing freely whatsoever, he doesn't tend to topple over or fall over on one side, he doesn't need that extra support, which is brilliant, and I have to point out that this cape is very heavy and a thick material that has a lot of weight to it, which will pull him from one direction to another, so it is definitely a mark of quality, the fact that he can stand freely without the use of a stand, and I give them top marks for that. And I also, as I mentioned earlier, I really love this cape. I think it's really versatile. I love how much cloth and material they've given us here to make sure that we can create a lot of different poses and looks and make sure that it's, reminiscent of what we see on screen. And whilst the head sculpts aren't spot on perfect in terms of their likeness, I think they're pretty darn close, and I'm certainly happy with what we've got here. And as I said, I'm just delighted to have a 1/6 Christopher Lee Dracula in my collection. Not something I ever thought I'd get a chance to own, and I'm absolutely delighted that we have this. My only request really is that we could get a follow-up and get the Peter Cushing Van Helsing at some point. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider giving the video a like. That kind of thing really does help the channel out, and it allows me to keep making more content. And if you're interested in seeing more content, remember to hit subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos coming soon.